The global geopolitical landscape is undergoing significant transformation, driven by the escalating competition between traditional Western powers, led by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, and an emerging bloc of Eastern nations. At the heart of this change lies the dynamic interplay between NATO, Russia, and the BRICS nations, an increasingly influential group poised for further expansion. This complex realignment of global power is shaped by numerous factors, including the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, the perceived decline of Western hegemony, and the growing economic and political influence of non-Western powers. This detailed analysis will delve into the key aspects of this evolving landscape, providing a comprehensive understanding of NATO's role, Russia's ambitions, BRICS's rise, and the factors contributing to the shift toward a multipolar world order. The article will also explore how these developments are reshaping global alliances and influencing international policy, economics, and security. NATO, the Western Alliance. Historical context. NATO, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was established on April 4, 1949, in the aftermath of World War II. Its primary mission was to create a collective defense system against the expansionist ambitions of the Soviet Union during the Cold War. At its core, NATO's founding principle is enshrined in Article 5 of the Washington Treaty, which states that an armed attack against one member is considered an attack against all, thereby ensuring collective security. NATO originally consisted of 12 members from North America and Western Europe, but it has grown to 31 member states as of 2023, with Finland being the most recent addition. Over the decades, NATO has adapted to changing global security threats, expanding its mission beyond the defense of Europe to include addressing terrorism, regional conflicts, and emerging threats such as cyber attacks. Post-Cold War evolution. With the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, NATO's role transformed from a defense pact against communism to a more versatile alliance focused on broader security issues. In the 1990s and early 2000s, NATO became increasingly involved in international peacekeeping and crisis management operations. Notably, NATO forces participated in the Balkans conflicts, enforcing no-fly zones and later leading peacekeeping missions in Bosnia and Kosovo. Following the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks, NATO invoked Article 5 for the first time in its history, leading to its participation in military operations in Afghanistan. These actions signaled a significant shift in NATO's mission, from traditional territorial defense to global counter-terrorism and peace enforcement. In this period, NATO also pursued expansion into Eastern Europe, admitting former Warsaw Pact countries such as Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic, further extending its influence into Russia's former sphere of control. NATO in the 21st century. Today, NATO continues to adapt to new security challenges. Cybersecurity, hybrid warfare, and counter-terrorism are critical areas of focus. NATO has also engaged in collective defense against Russia's aggression, especially after Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014. The ongoing conflict in Ukraine has further highlighted NATO's importance as a bulwark against Russian expansionism. NATO's primary objectives now include deterrence and defense, strengthening military presence in Eastern Europe to deter Russian aggression. Crisis management, engaging in peacekeeping and stabilization operations in conflict regions. Cooperative security, building partnerships with non-member countries to address global challenges. And cybersecurity, enhancing capabilities to defend against cyber attacks on critical infrastructure and government institutions. Russia, the resurgent power. The legacy of the Soviet Union. Russia's modern foreign policy is deeply influenced by the legacy of the Soviet Union. After the collapse of the USSR, Russia experienced a period of significant political and economic turmoil, which many Russians, including President Vladimir Putin, perceived as a period of national humiliation. The loss of former Soviet territories to NATO and the European Union, coupled with the economic instability of the 1990s, fueled a desire within Russia to reassert itself on the global stage. Vladimir Putin's leadership and vision. Under the leadership of Vladimir Putin, Russia has pursued a more assertive foreign policy, seeking to restore its status as a great power and reclaim its influence over the former Soviet states. Putin's strategic vision includes 1. Restoring Russia's sphere of influence. Russia has actively sought to reintegrate former Soviet states into its sphere of influence, either through political means or military intervention. This is evident in the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, as well as Russia's involvement in conflicts in Georgia and Syria. 2. Countering NATO expansion. One of Putin's primary foreign policy objectives has been to counter NATO's eastward expansion. Russia views NATO's presence on its borders as a direct threat to its security. This opposition was a major factor in Russia's decision to annex Crimea in 2014 and to support separatists in eastern Ukraine. 3. Rebuilding military power. Russia has invested heavily in modernizing its military, with a focus on advanced weaponry, nuclear deterrence, and cyber capabilities. The military is a key tool in Russia's strategy to project power globally, as demonstrated by its military interventions in Ukraine and Syria. 4. Energy dominance. Russia's energy sector plays a critical role in its foreign policy. As one of the world's largest producers of oil and natural gas, Russia has used energy exports as a tool for exerting influence over Europe, particularly over countries that are heavily dependent on Russian energy supplies. Ukraine conflict and global impact. The annexation of Crimea in 2014 and the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022 represent the most direct challenges to the post-Cold War European order. These actions have led to widespread condemnation from the international community, resulting in severe economic sanctions against Russia and further isolation from Western powers. However, the conflict has also exposed the limits of Western influence and the growing importance of non-Western alliances. While NATO has provided significant military and logistical support to Ukraine, Russia has strengthened its ties with countries in the global south, particularly China, Iran, and India. These countries have largely refrained from condemning Russia's actions, highlighting the growing divide between the West and the rest of the world. Russia's war in Ukraine has galvanized Western unity, leading to unprecedented sanctions and a bolstered NATO presence in Eastern Europe. However, it has also accelerated global geopolitical realignment as countries outside the West seek to navigate the conflict without taking sides. BRICS, the emerging counterweight. Origins and evolution. BRICS is an acronym for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, representing a coalition of major emerging economies. Established in 2009, the BRICS group was formed as a response to the dominance of Western-led financial institutions like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. The founding nations of BRICS sought to promote more equitable global governance and to address the imbalances in economic development and political influence between developed and developing nations. Objectives and strategic importance. BRICS has two main objectives. First, economic cooperation. The BRICS nations seek to enhance economic cooperation among themselves, particularly in areas such as trade, investment, and infrastructure development. The new development bank, established by BRICS in 2014, aims to provide financial support for development projects in emerging economies, serving as an alternative to the IMF and World Bank. Second, challenging Western dominance. BRICS nations share a common goal of reforming global governance structures to reflect the changing balance of power in the international system. This includes advocating for greater representation in international organizations like the United Nations and the IMF, as well as promoting a multipolar world order. Economic power and geopolitical influence. BRICS countries collectively account for more than 40% of the world's population and nearly 25% of global GDP. Individually, BRICS members wield significant influence in various sectors. China, the world's second-largest economy, is the leading force in BRICS. Its Belt and Road Initiative has extended China's influence across Asia, Africa, and Europe, cementing its role as a global power. India, as the world's largest democracy and a rapidly growing economy, plays a critical role in BRICS. India has sought to balance its relationships with both the West and its BRICS partners, particularly China and Russia. Despite facing economic sanctions from the West, Russia's role in BRICS allows it to remain connected to global markets, particularly through energy trade with China and India. Brazil and South Africa provide regional leadership in Latin America and Africa, respectively, making BRICS a truly global alliance. Expansion of BRICS. A new world order. In recent years, BRICS has expanded to include new members, signaling its growing influence on the world stage. At the 2023 BRICS Summit, 6 new countries, Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, were invited to join the group. This expansion is a clear indication that BRICS is positioning itself as a counterweight to the West, with the potential to reshape global institutions and economic governance. The inclusion of these new members adds significant economic and geopolitical weight to the group. For instance, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates bring significant financial power, bolstered by their oil wealth. Iran provides strategic importance in the Middle East, furthering BRICS' influence in the region. Argentina, Egypt, and Ethiopia expand BRICS' reach in Latin America and Africa, making it a more diverse and representative coalition. The Ukraine conflict, a catalyst for global geopolitical shifts. Russia's motivations in Ukraine. The ongoing conflict in Ukraine, which began with Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014 and escalated into a full-scale invasion in 2022, is a key driver of the geopolitical shifts currently underway. Russia's primary motivations in Ukraine are multifaceted, encompassing historical, geopolitical, and security concerns. First, historical claims. Russia views Ukraine, particularly Crimea and the eastern Donbas region, as historically part of its sphere of influence. Russian leaders often cite deep historical ties between the two nations, emphasizing that Ukraine's integration into Western institutions like NATO or the European Union threatens Russia's identity and security. Second, preventing NATO expansion. Russia's actions in Ukraine are directly tied to its opposition to NATO's eastward expansion. NATO's enlargement, which brought former Soviet states and Warsaw Pact countries into the alliance, is perceived by Moscow as a strategic threat. The prospect of Ukraine joining NATO was a key factor in Russia's decision to intervene militarily. Third, strategic buffer. Geopolitically, Ukraine serves as a strategic buffer between Russia and NATO. Losing Ukraine to Western influence would, in Russia's view, shift the balance of power in Eastern Europe and threaten its security posture. Western response and NATO's role. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has led to a robust response from NATO and Western countries. The war has rekindled NATO's purpose as a collective defense alliance, leading to, first, increased NATO presence in Eastern Europe. NATO has significantly strengthened its military presence along its eastern flank, deploying additional troops, equipment, and air defense systems to deter further Russian aggression. Countries like Poland and the Baltic states, which share borders with Russia or its ally Belarus, have become focal points for NATO's deterrence efforts. Second, military aid to Ukraine. The West, led by the United States, has provided billions of dollars in military aid to Ukraine, including advanced weaponry, training, and intelligence support. This aid has enabled Ukraine to mount a strong defense against Russia's advances and reclaim some of its occupied territories. Third, economic sanctions on Russia. In addition to military support for Ukraine, the West has imposed severe economic sanctions on Russia. targeting its energy exports, financial institutions, and key industries. These sanctions are designed to cripple Russia's economy and weaken its ability to sustain the war effort. Despite these efforts, the conflict has also revealed divisions within the international community, particularly among non-Western countries, many of whom have opted for a neutral stance or continued their economic relations with Russia. Global implications of the Ukraine conflict. The war in Ukraine has had far-reaching consequences beyond Europe, accelerating the formation of new alliances and deepening the rift between Western powers and the emerging Eastern Bloc. Some of the global implications include, first, energy geopolitics. The conflict has disrupted global energy markets, particularly as Europe seeks to reduce its reliance on Russian oil and gas. This shift has created opportunities for energy exporting nations like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Iran, many of which are now part of or aligned with the BRICS bloc. Second, global food security. Ukraine and Russia are major exporters of grain, and the war has disrupted food supplies, particularly in developing countries. This has created economic stress in regions like Africa and the Middle East, highlighting the need for alternative trade routes and alliances. Third, military alliances and arms race. The conflict has intensified the global arms race, with countries ramping up defense spending and seeking new military partnerships. NATO's European members in particular are increasing their defense budgets, while Russia is looking to China and other BRICS members for military and economic support. The rise of the collective East, a multifaceted phenomenon. Economic growth of BRICS. Nations. The rapid economic growth of BRICS countries has been one of the most significant drivers of their increasing geopolitical influence. Collectively, the BRICS nations now represent a larger share of global GDP than the G7 economies. This economic power has translated into greater leverage in international forums and a stronger voice in shaping global governance. China's economic dominance. As the world's second-largest economy and the largest in BRICS, China has spearheaded efforts to challenge the economic dominance of the West. Its Belt and Road Initiative, which funds infrastructure projects across Asia, Africa, and Europe, has enhanced China's global influence by providing an alternative to Western-backed development models. India's growing role. India, with its burgeoning economy and large population, is also a key player in BRICS. India's strategic importance is further underscored by its balancing act between the West and its BRICS partners, particularly as it seeks to maintain strong relations with both the United States and Russia. Russia's economic resilience. Despite sanctions, Russia has maintained economic ties with China and India, particularly in the energy sector. Russia has redirected much of its oil and gas exports to these countries, mitigating the impact of Western sanctions and reinforcing its role within BRICS. Political assertiveness and strategic realignments. BRICS. Nations have also become more politically assertive on the global stage, challenging Western-dominated institutions and advocating for a multipolar world order. Reforming global governance. BRICS has consistently called for reforms in global governance structures, including the United Nations Security Council, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund. BRICS members argue that these institutions reflect outdated power dynamics and do not adequately represent the interests of emerging economies. Strategic partnerships and alliances. BRICS nations have formed strategic partnerships with other emerging economies and regional powers. For instance, the China-Russia relationship has strengthened in recent years, driven by a shared interest in countering US influence. Similarly, India's diplomatic engagements with Africa and Latin America are expanding as it seeks to leverage its growing economic and political clout. Disillusionment with the West. Many countries, particularly in the global South, are increasingly disillusioned with Western policies, particularly in areas such as interventionism, economic sanctions, and political coercion. BRICS offers an alternative model for international cooperation, one that emphasizes sovereignty, non-interference, and mutual development. Decline of Western hegemony. The perceived decline of Western hegemony is another factor contributing to the rise of the collective East. Several trends point to this shift. Economic stagnation in the West. Many Western countries, particularly in Europe, are facing economic challenges, including slow growth, high levels of debt, and rising inequality. In contrast, BRICS nations, led by China and India, continue to experience robust economic growth, further shifting the global balance of power. Political polarization and domestic challenges. Western democracies are grappling with deep political polarization and internal challenges which have weakened their ability to project power internationally. The rise of populism, the decline of multilateralism, and the erosion of trust in democratic institutions are creating vacuums that BRICS countries are eager to fill. Shift in global trade patterns. The emergence of alternative trade networks, led by China's Belt and Road Initiative and Russia's pivot to Asia, is further eroding Western dominance in global trade. As BRICS nations deepen their economic ties with each other and with countries in the global south, Western economic influence is gradually diminishing. The role of strategic partnerships. Strategic partnerships between Eastern nations are playing a crucial role in strengthening the position of the collective East. Several key partnerships are shaping the global geopolitical landscape. China-Russia alliance. The deepening cooperation between China and Russia is one of the most significant developments in global geopolitics. While not a formal alliance, the two countries share a common interest in counterbalancing US influence and have coordinated their positions on key issues such as Ukraine and Taiwan. India's balancing act. India has maintained a delicate balance between its partnerships with the West and its role in BRICS. India's growing strategic relationship with the United States, particularly in areas such as defense and technology, contrasts with its long-standing ties with Russia and its participation in BRICS initiatives. Middle East alignment with BRICS. The inclusion of Saudi Arabia, Iran, and the UAE in BRICS is indicative of the Middle East's growing alignment with the collective East. These countries are seeking to diversify their economic and political relationships, moving away from traditional reliance on the West and toward partnerships with emerging powers like China and Russia. The role of Western strategies in accelerating Eastern rise, AUS. Unilateralism and global disillusionment. Western strategies, particularly those of the United States, have played a significant role in accelerating the rise of the collective East. Over the past 2 decades, US foreign policy has been marked by unilateralism and military interventionism, which have alienated many countries, especially in the global south. Key factors include: 1. Military dominance. The US's focus on military dominance, including its interventions in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya, has contributed to growing disillusionment with Western-led global governance. These interventions are widely perceived as destabilizing and have eroded trust in Western leadership. 2. Economic sanctions and coercive diplomacy. The extensive use of economic sanctions by the US and its allies has driven many countries to seek alternatives. Sanctions on countries like Iran, Russia, and Venezuela have pushed these nations to deepen their ties with BRICS members and other emerging economies. Many countries view Western foreign policy as hypocritical, particularly when it comes to issues of sovereignty and intervention. While the West often advocates for human rights and democracy, its selective interventions and support for authoritarian regimes when it suits geopolitical interests have led to growing disillusionment. This perceived double standard has pushed many nations towards BRICS, which presents itself as a coalition advocating for sovereignty, non-interference, and mutual development. The unity of Western alliances like NATO has been tested by internal divisions and competing national interests. The European Union, for example, has faced internal challenges, including Brexit, rising nationalism, and economic disparities between member states. These issues weaken the West's ability to present a unified front against the growing influence of the collective East. Additionally, while NATO has been reinvigorated by the Ukraine conflict, some member states are wary of becoming too deeply entangled in conflicts outside their borders. Economic dependence on Russian energy, for example, has complicated Europe's stance on sanctions and military support, leading to discrepancies in how individual NATO members respond to the threat posed by Russia. While the rise of BRICS and the collective East has created significant challenges for the West, it also presents opportunities for adaptation. The West will need to adjust to the realities of a multipolar world by engaging with emerging powers and reforming international institutions to reflect the new global balance of power. NATO, for its part, is expanding its focus beyond traditional military deterrence, exploring partnerships with non-member nations in the Indo-Pacific and addressing non-military threats like climate change and cyber attacks. Meanwhile, the United States and the European Union are increasingly recognizing the need to compete with China's Belt and Road Initiative by offering alternative development projects and trade partnerships to the global South. The global geopolitical landscape is in a state of profound flux, driven by the shifting dynamics between NATO, Russia, and the rising influence of BRICS. NATO remains a powerful military alliance, but it is increasingly challenged by Russia's assertiveness and the growing economic and political power of BRICS nations. Russia, under Vladimir Putin, is reasserting itself as a global power, leveraging military strength and energy resources to counter Western influence, particularly in Eastern Europe and the global South. At the same time, the BRICS bloc, with its recent expansion, is positioning itself as a credible counterweight to Western-dominated global institutions. The Ukraine conflict has served as a key catalyst for these changes, galvanizing NATO while also exposing divisions within the international community. As the West seeks to maintain its global leadership, it faces increasing competition from the collective East, a coalition of countries driven by rapid economic growth, political assertiveness, and strategic partnerships. Disillusionment with Western policies, particularly in the global South, has accelerated the shift towards a more multipolar world. In this emerging order, power is more evenly distributed across different actors, with BRICS nations playing an increasingly influential role. For the West, this presents both challenges and opportunities. While traditional dominance may be waning, there is still room for constructive engagement with rising powers through dialogue, reforms, and cooperation. The world is moving toward a multipolar structure where no single bloc dominates the global stage, and success will depend on how well nations navigate this complex and evolving landscape. In conclusion, as we move further into the 21st century, the rivalry between NATO, Russia, and BRICS is shaping the future of international relations. This evolving geopolitical landscape is characterized by the decline of unipolarity and the rise of a multipolar world, where diverse powers compete and cooperate across multiple domains. The ability of the West to adapt to these changes and find common ground with emerging powers will determine the trajectory of global stability, economic growth, and peace in the decades to come.